Hey, we're talking about the Apostle Paul, and we have been since last week. And yesterday we backtracked a little bit and we looked at Paul's journey to Mount Sinai in Arabia, as it was called in Arabia, and the purpose of that. And he returns, it's about a 3-year period that Luke condenses down to after a few days, So he goes to Mount Sinai, he comes back to, I don't know how long he stayed there. That whole period of leaving Damascus, going to Sinai, coming back to Damascus because of the Ezekiel, because of the Elijah connection. There's this coming back to Damascus to announce the anointed king. So he does that. And he spends time there. Things heat up. He has to leave because there's a plot to kill him by the government and by his fellow Jews. The people he should have the strongest connection with are not only rejecting him, they're wanting to kill him. He's got them so stirred up. And so the other disciples there say, you know what, maybe you need to leave. And so they come up with this plan. They lower him over the wall in a basket. And we've talked about that before. He speaks of that as being a weakness. It's not something he saw as a victory. It was a running. He's running for his life. And that had to be disturbing for Paul, who was so zealous for the traditions of his ancestors, but now so zealous that zeal has been turned for Christ, still for the God of Israel. He just realizes that God is Jesus and that he is both Messiah and Son of God. And I'm not going to delve into Trinitarian theology or anything like that at this point. We're just talking about that is where Paul is in his understanding. So he leaves Damascus and he comes to Jerusalem. Now you've got to get it in your mind, all of Paul's friends would have been the same mind as him. This zeal, the zeal to purify Israel, the zeal to have pure worship so that Yahweh will return, his glory will fill the temple, and the nations will be put down and they will come and serve Israel, and Israel will be free, and there will be new creation and all of this stuff. That's the hope of Israel. And they would have been of the same mind as Paul. Pharisees, probably. I would suspect that Paul learned this zeal, this Pharisaic zeal that he had from his family, from his father, more than likely. And so he returns to Jerusalem, where he had spent years there at school of Gamaliel, studying to be a rabbi, studying and being groomed to be on the Sanhedrin. He was a junior member of that. And how do you think those relationships went when he returned? I suspect that there was quite a bit of tension. I suspect that old friends and relations that he had there, certainly he had a sister there that lived in Jerusalem and at least one nephew. What was their relationship like now? What were the friendships like now? The very thing that all of them agreed needed to be stamped out, needed to be done away with, Paul was a part of it now. Paul was proclaiming this Jesus as King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Son of God, the Messiah, all of that. How do you suppose they took it? Probably not very well. I'm sure there was heartbreak. I'm sure that there was heartbreak for Paul and for his friendships and for his family relationships. We don't understand, Paul, what's going on with you? We don't get it at all. What has happened to you? And if you've ever had that experience, you know it's not all that pleasant. Well, there are a lot of people who become Christians and find that their relationships are no longer the same, find that people look at them differently. I remember when I felt called into the ministry and I made that public that I was going to pursue the ministry, my friends treated me differently. They didn't know what to make of me. They didn't know what to think of me. What in the world? What is this all about? And so there was this awkwardness that people didn't know how to take. And some of that was my fault. But anyway, having said that, you get the point. Paul has no one to be with. He comes to Jerusalem, and I'm going to read you a text, and let it soak in how sad this is of what Luke writes about Paul. When Paul came to Jerusalem, I'm in verse 26 of chapter 9 of Acts. When Paul came to Jerusalem, he was trying to associate with the disciples. In other words, he was working at it. He was, the word literally means to test, to put to a test. He's testing the disciples to see if he can find a connection, to see if he can find a place to fit in. He's testing the water, so to speak. I like the phrase he was trying to associate. The trying there, the testing is what is being translated as trying, and that's a good enough way to look at it. But I like that testing. He's testing it out. He's testing the disciples, is what it literally says, to see if there's a connection, to see if there's a fit for him, to see if there's any friendships for him. Is there any place for him? And the word to associate is trying to associate with the disciples means to cling to, cling on to become a part of. He wants to be a part of them. He wants to have fellowship with them. He wants to develop friendships with them. Paul is probably in his late 20s, possibly early 30s, maybe. And he longs for relationship. Everyone is shunning him. Everyone is pushing him aside. And if you've ever had that experience, like if you've moved to a new city, if you've gone to a new town, you've gone to a new school, a new class, wherever you are trying to develop relationships and friendships with people, and you're the stranger, you're the one that nobody else knows, it's difficult. It's hard. And too often, sadly, it happens in the church when people come and they want to be a part of the church and they want to make friends and they want to develop relationships because God has made us to have relationships. We're relational beings. And we long for that. All of us long for those relationships and attachments and friendships. And sadly, too often we are so busy with our own relationships, so busy with what we're doing that we don't notice the person who has come. We don't notice the one who's trying to make friends. We don't notice them in our small groups or in visiting the church worship service, and we don't notice them. And that's shame on us. We should be intentional about finding those people, about finding guests, finding visitors, finding those who are testing the waters, who are testing the church to see if there's a place for them, to see if it might be a fit for them. And sadly, sometimes people come away and say, well, I couldn't find any friends, nobody would be friends with me, nobody would go out to eat with me, nobody would do that. Now, sometimes it's our own fault as individuals when we are the stranger and we come into a place and we just wait for somebody to come to us. And, you know, if that's happened to you, here's the thing. Most of the time, people have so many relationships already that they just don't notice. Now, you're right. Shame on us, and we should be noticing. We need to be intentional, more intentional about that. But psychologically, you can only know so many people. You can only have so many relationships, and most people's plates are already full. So it's not intentional. It's not an intentional thing. It's just that people don't notice. And we need to do a better job as the church of taking notice of people who come and noticing them and speaking to them and trying to invite them. And I know how hard that is when you go to a new place and you try and nobody seems to notice, nobody seems to care. That's difficult. That's hard. And that's what Paul was experiencing. And if you know what that's like, if you've been in that position like I have, then you know that, man, that's a lonely place to be. And you just want somebody to talk to, somebody to be a friend. And that's hard when you move to a new place. It's hard sometimes when you move back to a place and you're trying to develop friendships and people already have their friendships, can't find a connection. Well, let me continue reading with what happened with Paul. So he came to tribal. He was trying to associate with the disciples. And here's the reason that they kind of pushed him aside. They were afraid of him, not believing that he was a disciple. So not only is he new to the disciples, actually they had heard of him before. Now this was 3 years ago when he left Jerusalem to go with letters from the high priest to drag Christians back to Jerusalem to stand before the Sanhedrin for heresy. But now he has returned, and people who knew him don't want to have anything to do with him. Believers that are there in Jerusalem have heard of him, and they don't want to have anything to do with him because they think he's up to no good. He's just lying, trying to find out where all the believers are so he can take them before the Sanhedrin for heresy. I know about that guy. I've heard about him. Well, that's a bitter pill, isn't it? Paul's Jewish relationships are shattered, or at least strained. The relationships he's trying to build with believers there in Jerusalem is not going anywhere because they don't trust him. Have you ever seen that happen where somebody has a conversion experience and people just say, well, I don't know about that. Yeah, I don't trust that guy. Well, that's what Paul's experiencing. And that had to be even worse for him because now no one is having anything to do with him. And then you get this wonderful phrase. This wonderful phrase. Let me read it to you. But they were all afraid of him, not believing that he was a disciple. But Barnabas. Oh, what a refreshing phrase. But Barnabas. Barnabas is going to come on the scene. Barnabas has already been on the scene, but not in the life of Paul. Barnabas is going to come on the scene. Now, his name is Joseph. He was a Levite, and he was from Cyprus. And he is gotten the nickname son of encouragement. It's a tough thing to translate, son of encouragement. Barnabi, son of the prophet, literally is what it is. Son of one who speaks good, speaks truth, and he is one who encourages and speaks the truth of the gospel and encourages people with that. But Barnabas, he's going to come on the scene and take Paul by the hand and say, look, I'll take this guy around. I'll show him around. And man, we need to have more people like Barnabas. And really, we all should be like Barnabas. But some, I think, are more gifted at it than others. And finding those folks who are trying to fit in, trying to make friends, and taking them by the hand and leading them to develop those friendships and relationships and doing that. And maybe it's you see somebody say, hey, why don't you come to our Sunday school class? Hey, why don't you come with me to lunch? Hey, why don't you do little things that we do to develop those relationships, and how necessary is that to promote unity and to promote wholeness within the congregation of believers, and also to promote that within our own culture, within our own society. The church should be leading the way in promoting unity because we have the one who can unify us, and that is Jesus Christ. Well, listen, we're going to talk more about this tomorrow. We're going to speak about Barnabas and how he takes Paul and leads him, develop those relationships. And I pray that you have that connection in your church. If you don't, we have a saying here at Troy First Baptist, this is the place you belong. You belong here, and we'd love to have you come and visit with us. We're meeting at 9:30 for worship, and when we do start Sunday school back and small groups back, we're going to have worship at 9:30, and then we're going to have our small groups. I'm excited about that. I think that's going to be a big deal. I'm excited about the possibilities of that, and I look forward to it. We haven't started that back yet. We're going to be making an announcement about that probably at the end of this week. We'll be making an announcement about that. We've got to get our protocols and stuff, especially in our children's department where it needs to be, and so in writing. And so we will be making an announcement about that probably at the end of this week. But anyway, worship is at 9:30. If you need a place to belong, come worship with us. Be my guest. Come on and worship with us. I hope you know that I love you, but more importantly, God loves you. He really does. He gave His Son that you might have forgiveness of sin, eternal life, and joy right now that's indescribable. I pray that you know that. Hey, listen, I'll see you tomorrow.